Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to these hustings. I think they're really important. I'm Dr. Zubair Ahmed. I'm the Labour candidate. I'm Dr. Zubair Ahmed. Hi everyone. Thank you for having me here. I'm Labour candidate for Glasgow Pollock in the Scottish Parliament election. And as you can probably see from my dress, I'm still in the hospital, and that's because I work here as a surgeon. And I've seen firsthand over the last year the wounds COVID has wreaked on our friends and family, particularly in the Bame communities. I'm someone who's of Glasgow, made by Glasgow, and who works in Glasgow. And I think that's really important to have that local flavour to politics. Have someone who's not just simply been a career politician, but has lived a life outside politics and has some, real life experience of the health service and how you can turn that around in the post-COVID era. So you should vote for me because I'm someone who's deeply embedded in my community. I'm experienced, and I'm someone who has palpably felt the trauma of COVID and knows what it's going to take over the next 5 years to put our country back together again. And it's going to need all of our energies, all of our focus. And I want us all to elect a parliament of all the talents so we can move away from years of career politicians telling us what to do.
Thank you for that, Zubair. That's your own opening. And if I now switch on to Nadia.
Hello, and thank you for hosting this event. Sorry. And good evening to everyone who's watching. My name is Nadia Kanyange, and I'm number 3 on the Scottish Green Party's Glasgow list. And I'm also a candidate for the Pollock constituency. I'm originally from Burundi, and I moved to the UK in 2003 as a refugee. So as someone who has experienced the hostile environment and the harsh immigration policies, I devoted myself to engage in society and also in politics so that I can contribute and try to make a difference. So I did not join the politics because it's a fancy job or it's a dream job, but I believe that it is important to have a good representation so that we can stand up for human rights, and then also for do believe in the voices of marginalized people, and also believe in the climate emergency. So this is the reason why I decided to stand, and so that we can build a better future for everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, Nadia. Thank you very much there. And if we can have Fatima now.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me here today. My name is Fatima Joji, and I am the #1 SNP candidate in the northeast of Scotland region. I was born and brought up in Aberdeenshire, but I'm also of Nigerian ethnicity. My parents were born and brought up in the northern part of Nigeria, so that's where I'm from. So I'm delighted to be here on this Nigerian Pride Radio. So I'm here to say that this election is about so much more than the immediate challenges we face. It's also about recovery and building a fairer and more inclusive country. So a vote for the SNP is a vote for serious and experienced leadership. It's a vote for a programme to kickstart the recovery. And once the COVID crisis is over, a choice over Scotland's future. And we want to make sure that the country we rebuild is the one we want it to be, with kindness, compassion, fairness, equality, and enterprise at its heart. And that's why I'm asking everyone here to give both their votes to the SNP for an SNP government. And with both votes SNP, we also have the opportunity to elect the most diverse Scottish Parliament in history. And to SNP supporters listening here, we can't and shouldn't take winning constituencies for granted. Both votes SNP is the way to express your electoral support for the party. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And now we have Aisha.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for the invitation and for hosting this evening. My name is Aisha Mir. I am the Scottish Liberal Democrat list candidate for Mid-Scotland and Fife. I've been in politics now for about 6 or 7 years. My family are from Pakistan originally, and I've had the benefit of being born in England, but living all of my life in Scotland. So I think of myself as a person that wears many hats. I'm English, I'm Scottish, I'm Pakistani, I'm European. But I'm also really proud of the fact that none of those hats identify me completely. I'm a lovely hodgepodge mixture of all these identities. The reason I'm standing in this election, and I think that you should vote for Liberal Democrats next week, is that Liberal Democrats are one of the few parties that are putting recovery first. This has been probably the worst year for many of us. Many of us will not recover from this year. The worst economic and health crisis we've seen in 100 years. Our focus is on recovery. Our focus is on the people of Scotland. Our focus is on education, the NHS, making sure that our businesses recover and we can get back to some kind of normality. That's our focus, is basically Scotland. Right now, we don't have time for historic, independent, old, divisive arguments, and we should really be focusing on Scotland and its future, and that means putting recovery first, and both votes for Lib Dems. Thank you.
Thank you, Aisha. Thank you very much for that. And now we have Ade.
Thanks, host, and thanks to everyone watching us tonight as well. It's an extraordinary election we will be going to on the 6th of May. We've had unprecedented levels of shock to the UK economy during the COVID pandemic. People have lost their jobs, people have lost their livelihoods. And even crucially, we have students who have missed out on learning as well. As a lecturer in further education myself, I know the importance of education to the lives and the prospects of our young people in terms of securing jobs. I think one thing which frustrates me up here in Scotland is that our students leave universities, but there are no jobs for them to do. We have several people going to public schools in Scotland, in Glasgow, as an example, and they don't achieve the right level of qualifications required to progress to high-paying jobs. We want to change that in the Scottish Conservatives. We've had the SNP for 14 years, and they failed in terms of the long-term prospects for our young people. Now is not the time for a second independence referendum. It's not the time to divide us. Give your party vote to the Scottish Conservatives on the 6th of May, and we would ensure that Scotland, which used to be the best country in the world in terms of education, but is now so poor in STEM subjects, we want to drive up educational standards in Scotland. Because if you truly want to change people's lives, if you truly want to improve lives, if you truly want to change a country, you focus on the young people, you give them fantastic education, and that's how we change society. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So there you have it, everyone listening to us at home. You're welcome to the Nigerian Pride, and today is the this is the Bame Scottish Parliamentary Election Debate 2021. And you've heard there the opening speech from each of the candidates we have here. You've heard from Sybil first, and you heard from Nadia. You also heard from Fatima, Aisha, and then Adi. So we're kicking on now. With all your questions you set in, I will be throwing these questions to them, and each of them will be responding one after the other. You can always leave your comments on the Facebook page there as you're watching live, and also on the YouTube page as you're watching as well. So, Sybil, I'll come back to you with the first question now, and this is basically on COVID-19. What should we expect from your party in terms of future containment measures and the rollout of vaccines and recovery?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's a question very close to my heart. I mean, for the last 12 months, I've been on the NHS front line dealing with the pandemic. And I think I have a fairly good grasp of, what trauma we've been through and what's yet to come. And I think we have to separate this out from, the virus itself, and then the impact of the virus in terms of its physical and mental problems. I think, thankfully, the virus is now becoming contained with the vaccination program. The vaccination program, regardless of which party you're from, we have to say has been a relative success. A lot of that success has been down to the institutions of this country as a whole, and by that I mean the United Kingdom, such as the National Health Service, such as the Army, have really stepped up to really deliver that vaccine. Going forward, the trauma of post-COVID might actually be deeper and more scarring than COVID. We have a mental health crisis. We have thousands of people trying to phone mental health helplines in Scotland after 14 years of SNP government, and no one answering their call. We have patients waiting exponentially longer for their cancer treatments and other treatments. And we may be in a situation very quickly, and I can tell you this from my own experience, where the waiting lists are hitting the same levels they were hitting in the 1990s under the Tory government. And we have a jobs crisis. Our young people have nowhere to go. And the Labour Party has a comprehensive focus on all of these issues. These issues are a once-in-a-lifetime problem, and there's only a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get it right. Otherwise, we will lose a whole generation of people. And that mandates an absolute entire focus, and every molecule of political oxygen to be devoted to the task of recovery. This is not a 1-year thing or a 2-year thing. This is a 5-year thing. We have to get it right for the sake of our children. And anything else, any other aspect of politics is simply a distraction, whether it's talking about referendums or changing the constitution or tinkering with this or tinkering with that. Politicians and politics is about priorities, and it's about articulating your priorities. And there is no doubt, I think even in the minds of the most fervent nationalist, that the priority for this country is our national recovery, and anything else will simply just dilute that and diminish that and risk the future of our children and a lost generation.
All right. Thank you very much there. Nadia, I would just want you to answer the same question. What would be, what should we expect from your party, from yourself if elected, in terms of future containment, measures, the rollout of vaccines, and recovery, of course, from this COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a very good question. And I just need to say that we know this pandemic has made inequality and poverty even worse than they were. So I'm taking this opportunity to send my sympathy to everyone who have lost their loved one. It has been a very difficult time for everyone. And everyone has been affected by these things. So what the Scottish Green Party are going to do is to develop a robust PPE procurement process, put in place a long-term support for a domestic manufacturing industry, and ensuring that we have enough equipment so that when we get into situations that are not in control, so that we have what's necessary, so that we can also ensure the provision of optimal personal protection equipment, and prioritizing also the testing and the vaccination program for all health and care staff, so that we can also raise awareness of the problems that caused by long COVID situation, so that people can get the access to treatment that they deserve, and also rehabilitation, and make sure that everyone are looked after as they should.
All right. Thank you very much for that. Fatima, if I can have you come in on this now.
Yeah, and thank you very much for that question. And like Nadia, my thoughts and prayers are with everyone who has lost someone so dear to them during this pandemic. It has been a trying time for everyone. And in the SNP, we absolutely recognise this as well. And that's why we know that our immediate priority, should we be re-elected, I'll make that very clear, that our immediate priority must and will be to steer Scotland through the COVID crisis and get our recovery underway. I know our opponents enjoy throwing the fact that we're just focused on a referendum, but the referendum is a post-COVID option for us to be able to choose how we want to shape our recovery. So right now, our immediate priority, you can quote me on that, is to steer Scotland through this COVID crisis and proceed with the Scottish referendum after that in order to shape our own recovery, so we're not at the mercy of decisions by a Tory government that we have not elected for decades. And having said this morning alone, we published a document setting out the first 100 days of our COVID recovery if Nicola Sturgeon is re-elected as First Minister. And I can say with that document and looking at other parties and proposals, we are the only party with a credible post-election COVID recovery plan with details of key social and economic actions that we will take. The first task of our Scottish Government will be to keep the virus under control and get back as much normality as possible as soon as possible and as quickly as it's safe to do so. So I can confirm that in the first 100 days, we aim to complete the vaccination of all adults subject to supply, moving to level 2 on the 17th of May, reopening more of society and the economy. And this means that people will be able to meet in each other's homes in small numbers, visit cinemas, and also in areas, for instance, in our health sector, we will implement a 4% pay rise, and that's 3% on top of what the UK government is offering. So thankfully, we have our devolution where we can decide in Scotland that we want to raise more. So that's 4% for our NHS workers, subject to the agreement with the workforce, and that includes back pay. We will also support youth employment by immediately appointing a minister specifically tasked with supporting youth employment. We will invest 45 million through local partnerships to provide training and employer recruitment incentives for youth. And we will help children by introducing free school lunches for primary 4 children as a first step to delivering free school breakfast and lunches for all primary school pupils. And we will also begin the provision of ensuring that all school children are equipped with tablets and laptops. That's just a few of our proposals and our promises in the first 100 days. And in addition, we have set out plans to achieve our net zero targets to address the climate emergency. And to address poverty and inequality, we will establish a steering group inviting cross-party representation to progress the delivery of a Scottish minimum income guarantee for all. And I can conclude by saying that our publicly owned NHS would be safe from Tory trade deals. And that's our promises in the first 100 days of what we'll set into motion immediately when elected.
Okay, thank you very much for that one there. Aisha, can I hear from you now?
Hi, Olive. Thank you. So I think I'm inclined to not basically reel off the manifesto in about 30 seconds. My view, if you're asking me, is to, I think we need to take a global view on this, to be honest with you, in terms of when we're looking at containment. Pandemics happen, they have happened, and in years, the medical expert here, so you can maybe keep me right or correct me if I'm wrong. You know, they do happen. Coronavirus itself is not a new thing. So pandemics have a cycle. We had something in the UK called, I think it was Operation Cygnus back in the 2016-ish, where a kind of a role play was run that in the event of a pandemic, how did the NHS cope? At that point, things were flagged up in terms of PPE, medical equipment like ventilators, and that was ignored by Addy's colleagues in Westminster, which really exacerbated the situation when it did begin last year. It came out of the blue. Now, one of the things I think we should be doing better is getting better at global partnerships. We are a family of nations on this planet, and what we're seeing is a real inequality globally in terms of the vaccination program. It's absolutely disgusting that countries, wealthy countries like the UK, like Scotland, like US, have this oversupply of vaccine, are displaying this level of vaccine nationalism where we've got countries, certainly in the African continent, that are barely hitting 4 figures in terms of the amount of people vaccinated. Virus does not recognize political parties, it doesn't recognize race or borders. We have to make sure that we have a much better global approach to pandemics. In the immediate, in terms of Scotland, what do we need to do? Well, we've been calling for an inquiry in Westminster and in Holyrood since last year into how the pandemic was handled. I think that's really, really critical to see the decisions that were made by both governments and how they were made. What was the data? We've had lots of chat about the science, not dates. Then we hear about dates and not science, and that's happened in Westminster and in Holyrood. You know, so we really need to get a grip of what happened, how we dealt with it, and we can learn going forward. We need to make sure that in Scotland, certainly, we've got good supply of PPE. Going back to that Operation Cygnus I referenced, medical equipment stores are maintained, and we also need to make sure, and I hope my colleagues agree with me on this, that what we've seen certainly in the last 12 months from London and Holyrood is we need to make sure that our science and our scientists are kept independent and free of politics, because there's been some questionable things that have come out certainly in the last 12 months, especially in Holyrood from the Scottish Government, that seem to have contradicted previous statements. One of the things that we looked at and we've been calling out for a long time with reference to certainly the financial impact is the universal basic income. That's been a linked-in policy for a long, long time. And again, last year, at the beginning of the pandemic, we shouted loudly for trials to begin of UBI. It was the perfect time. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, and it's wonderful to see Nicola Sturgeon admit that actually that would have been a good time, and sadly they didn't agree to it. But this is going to increase our poverty. The impact of COVID will stay with us for a long time. And I would say, I think it's going to be longer than 5 years. And I also sadly think it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better for business, for individuals, for our NHS. We need to get on this straight away. We don't have time for diversions. We don't have time for deflections. We do not have time for what is a poisonous and bitter battle between the SNP and the Conservatives, mudslinging matches, because all that's happening is the rest of us are getting spattered. I, for one, am interested in putting recovery first. That's what we've been talking about for a long, long time, and that's what we need to do. Polling after polling shows that people are not interested. They're interested about their jobs. They're interested in their kids, their education, their mental health. Are they going to have a job to go back to? You know, and the last thing I'll say is, I saw the SNP's the 100 Steps thing, and I think the document was called First Steps, I believe. It does raise the question of, after 14 years in government, why they're looking at First Steps now.
Okay, thank you very much, Aisha, for that. And finally, can we hear from Bayo now? Ade, sorry.
Thanks, Jay. Just a couple of things. A number of the candidates have raised a couple of issues that I'll address in 1 or 2 minutes. I think the first thing to say is that the UK government has been fantastic in terms of our vaccine deployment, something that even Nicola Sturgeon can't, bring herself to admit. We've had this global sort of procurement with the Pfizer vaccine, the Moderna vaccine, and also the AstraZeneca vaccine, which was produced at cost price. And that goes back to Aisha's comment in terms of providing vaccines to people from the third world country. Unlike the Pfizer vaccine, we're actually, giving people the AstraZeneca vaccine at cost price, which means there is no profit being made with the AstraZeneca vaccine. I think it's worth noting as well that the UK is part of a global alliance to secure vaccines for people from poor country. And I know firsthand that the UK government has tried to send vaccines to Nigeria, but Nigeria does not have the infrastructure to store the vaccine. That's not the fault of the UK government. The UK government has now sent the vaccines are now in Ghana, which is a smaller country, but they are much more efficient in terms of the operational infrastructure. So I don't think it's fair to blame the UK government for that. I think other countries need to take a little bit of responsibility in terms of their vaccine deployment. I want to thank Dr. Zubi Ahmed as well for what you've done during the pandemic. I think it's been fantastic in terms of seeing the country through what has been obviously a very challenging period. On to Fatima now, she made a couple of points in terms of SNP's plans, and I think Aisha's countered that a little bit. I know Fatima is a very devoted SNP servant, but can I just remind her? And in January, John Sweeney, the Deputy First Minister, said a second independence referendum is essential, in inverted comma, to Scotland's COVID recovery. He said that in January. What has changed? Perhaps the SNP are looking at the polling and saying that people aren't interested in a second independence referendum, and have come up with these, what I'd only call political tactics, basically to shut up votes and to gain votes. We all know what the SNP is all about. It's all about a second interrep too. And can I just say as well, after 14 years in government, there is no new plan coming from the SNP. So in Scotland, we've got the highest drug death rate in Europe, falling standards of education in terms of STEM subjects. In my job as a lecturer, this is something that I see firsthand. We've got failing public services. And in terms of mental health, I think you asked that question as well, and that's where I'll stop. In our manifesto, the Scottish Conservatives have committed ourselves to ring fencing our budget by 10%. So all of the NHS budget, we would ring fence 10% of it to go to mental health. That means community mental health services. We would encourage social prescribing, cognitive therapy, and also peer support as well, because I think we need all that. And just as a side point, I think Dr. Ahmed will know this. We need to encourage our GPs. We need to encourage people working in primary care sector. I see it in Glasgow, on the Glasgow Health and Social Care Integration Joint Board, working with the Health Board in Glasgow. And obviously, I've got a couple of friends who are GPs themselves. and the SNP have not really been helpful in terms of our information governance and information sharing arrangements during the pandemic, and that's something the SNP needs to fix.
Every one of you for that. So I'm just going to ask, there's a backup question because from what I've seen from everything each of your parties have out there, you've all talked about recovery. And the question now is, I know the SNP have promised as a 20% increase. They've kept 20% increase NHS recovery plan, boosting frontline spending by 20%. I've also seen something what Ade said earlier about the 10% the Conservative Party is going to use, and also listening to Anna Sauer of Labour also talking about NHS and things you're going to do. The same with Willie Rennie this morning on BBC Radio Scotland. So the question is, how do you guys, how do your parties plan to provide funding for this, particularly in Scotland, and also focusing on the ethnic minority communities? And I will start that from Zabur now.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very important point. I think we would all, obviously, we're from different parties, we would be all unanimous on is that Bame communities have disproportionately suffered as a result of COVID-19. There is no doubt about that. And the Labour Party recognises that, acknowledges that, and it is going to provide funding to increase mental health spending from 8.5% to 11% of the healthcare budget. It's going to make sure every health board by the end of the Parliament has a rapid diagnostic centre for cancer, so we can catch up with all the over 4,000 missed cancer diagnoses. And we're going to make sure our spending in Scotland is on par with what is spent per head of population in England on the health service. It's nice to talk about numbers, but we've got to remember, in Scotland, we take decisions about our health service in Scotland. The SNP government is responsible for the health service in Scotland. And it would be remiss of anyone having this discussion not to look at the record of what's going on in the last 14 years. I mean, you can see what I'm sitting, you can see what I do. So I would profess to some insight into this component of the discussion. And I think the striking statistic here is the fact that never in any of the years that Nicola Sturgeon has been First Minister of Scotland has she ever come close to achieving her targets on the 18-week wait to get people from a GP referral to a consultant like me, for me as a consultant to put on a computer here the tests I want done, for them to be done, get that patient back to on the seat next to me, back to my clinic and get them treated. Okay? That target has never been met the whole time she's been First Minister. So it would be nice to frame this as only COVID recovery and that everything was hunky-dory before that, but it patently wasn't. And I can tell you it wasn't, because I work in the system. The health service needs continual renewal. It needs innovation. It needs its people to function autonomously to produce that innovation. And never in the time that I've worked in the health service under an SNP government has that culture ever been embedded. And the reason for that is because this SNP government can never seek to do anything too revolutionary. It always has to just tinker around the edges. Because if it did, it may lose support with certain sectors and certain communities which have grievance, and the grievances they use to propel an independence referendum and ultimately get it over the line with a 50% or 50.1% majority. A nationalist government can never be an NHS government because it never has its eye on the ball of the NHS. It only ever has eyes for one prize, and that's the teenage dream of Nicola Sturgeon to get a separate state. And that's why in this election we have a simple choice. We can either vote for a recovery parliament or we can vote for a separatist, divisive parliament. Because I must take issue with one thing that Fatima said, that the SNP government is focused on recovery and it's got a 100-day plan. Well, I've got news for her. I've got news for the SNP that this recovery is not going to take 100 days. It might take even more than 1,000 days. The whole of the next Parliament needs to be dedicated to this cause. And what we've heard from Nicola Sturgeon is that as early as the second year of the next Parliament, she wants to have an independence referendum. And for those of us that were there for the first referendum, we know that independence referendum is not like turning on a light switch. You have to prepare for it. You've got to get the prospectus right. And that is a 18-month to 2-year process. So basically, as soon as lights go on in the new Parliament, if the Nationalists get what they want, which is a majority, they will start using the machinery of government once again to focus on building that prospectus for an independence referendum and failing a prospectus for the health service once again.
Nadia, we have you, please, on the
Yeah.
question.
Thank you. That's a very good question. As everybody has mentioned, it's very important that all parties focus on the recovery, because it's gonna be a very difficult things to finish, because it's not in 5 years that we'll be able to sort everything. There is a lot of things to tackle. There is employment issues. People are struggling in jobs. There is children. So for the Scottish Green Party, we just believe that it is important to put the well-being of people at first, to make sure that the people are given the support that they need. We need to rebuild a new home with sustainable energy. So it is important to make sure that we focus on a good recovery, sustainable, focusing on tackling the climate emergency as well, to make sure that we are building a better society for everyone, because we can agree to disagree with all political parties what's important or not important, but what we need to put the focus on is to make sure that the future Scotland, and then how we come back from this and make sure that people are given the support that they need. There is a lot of issues to tackle here, and I hope we can go into this in the upcoming questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So if I can hear from you, Fatima, please.
Yeah, can I just clarify, you asked how we will pay for what's in our manifesto? Was that the main question you asked?
Or the recovery, the recovery you've all promised.
Yeah.
How do you want to finance that? How you will get the funding?
Okay, yes. Yeah, no, I just wanted to make sure that was a clear question. Yeah, so I can confirm that our manifesto is fully costed, and all costs can be met from within the central funding scenario that's been outlined in the Scottish Government, and that's been published online. It was recently published in the medium-term financial strategy, and that's available for everyone to look at. I've had a look at it myself in the past few weeks. And the reason why we can afford it and we're saying that fund is available is because it's a matter of priorities, what governments choose to prioritise. Unlike us prioritising the funding of things like nuclear weapons, we're choosing to use our money to fund things like poverty and reduction strategies. And just to use this opportunity to address some concerns that I've heard raised from other candidates that I've written on helpfully on post-it notes just to jot down. I'm hearing things like one of my colleagues mentioned what you'll do, right? I was hearing Councillor Bio, you had an opportunity to make a positive case for what your party would do, but you spent the whole time speaking about what we're all doing wrong instead of what the Tories will do right, which is basically much where we're lacking in the positive case for the union too. I'm yet to hear a positive case for that. And to clarify, yes, John Sweeney said essential, that COVID is essential to our recovery. It is. It's essential to our recovery, but it's not the beginning. It is essential to it. But we are prioritising COVID recovery, and a referendum will be essential to helping us move forward. So it won't come immediately as we begin, but we will look to a referendum to help us reach the end. So it's not going to be the first thing and it's not the last thing. Independence is not the end, it's a means to an end. So I'll just clarify that. And in terms of terminology used in our document, well, every election, we have a parliament, we start a new parliament, it could be a different government. So the reason why we say first steps, every government, whether you're re-elected or not, your first 100 days will be tracked as what you do in those first steps when you get re-elected. So we've outlined what we're going to start immediately doing as our first steps post-election or post-re-election. And also we have also outlined what we will do in terms of a continuation, such as things as completing the vaccination process for adults. So that's a few things that in our manifesto. In terms of other countries taking responsibility for vaccinations, I think Councillor Bayo, you made a very fair point there, but we do have to recognise the socio-economic inequalities. I'm a student of international development. I studied it at postgraduate level. There is such a thing as inequalities between countries, among countries. There was inequalities in vaccination procurements. There is underdevelopment. There is such thing as developing and underdeveloped countries. It is not some countries' fault that they are left in the situation they are. We have to think about the effects of colonialism. So global development is a thing, and we cannot just expect countries that are struggling to get their act together when it's not even their fault that they're in that process in the first place. So we need to be able to address, we developing countries need to be able to address and confront these socio-economic inequalities that are affecting countries like Nigeria and India from actually reaching their full potential. And just to finish on the final point, the STEM subjects are right there. They're right online in terms of Scotland failing. Well, the statistics are right there and they speak a different story. Both England's and Scotland's performance has improved in one domain and stayed the same in two domains between PISA, that's the figures online, 2015 and 2018. England's performance is statistically similar to 2015 in reading and science, and Scotland's performance is also statistically similar to 2015 in science and maths. So if you want to tell a tale of two governments, then you also need to be willing to pick up the UK government as well, and Scotland has certainly made more advances in terms of education improvements. So I think it's very important that if we're going to be critical of each other, we also need to look at home too, which the SNP is not afraid to do. Nicola Sturgeon has come out, admitted when she is wrong, and has made every attempt to do it right, which is why we are a progressive government. So that's some of the things that I've outlined in our manifesto. I hope I've been able to outline that we can afford it because it's based on priorities, and I hope I've been able to address some of the myths and misconceptions about our priorities here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Fatima. Aisha, can we have you on the same question, please? How do you... What? Oh, I think we lost Aisha there. I hope she'll be able to connect back later on. But I think
Hello.
Aisha, are you
I'm
back?
sorry. My
Okay.
computer just completely crashed on me. I was having a moment. I was like, not now. So sorry about that.
So, Aisha, if you just want to respond on how you think your party will be able to fund the recovery you promised there.
Yeah, so yeah, I got some interesting answers there. So the question was obviously with reference to ethnic minorities. And I thought Zabir made quite a good few points there, actually. You know, we know that the COVID virus has disproportionately affected Bame communities. I hate using that expression, pardon me, but I will use it for convenience. And even before COVID, the depth of inequality across the UK, not just in Scotland, has just been getting bigger and bigger and bigger in all areas. In fact, Nadia we didn't get a chance to meet, but we did a little documentary back in February about the fact that there's never been a Bame woman of colour ever elected to Parliament, you know, and taking my political hat off for a moment, I think we can all agree that we are massively underrepresented in practically every section across the UK. So something like COVID comes along, it just knocks the wind out of your sails when you're already sitting, you know, at the bottom of the food chain, for want of a better expression. So certainly getting equality, getting equal access, levelling off that runs through the heart of our manifesto. It's a very Liberal Democrat thing. It's always something that we are renowned for in the UK in terms of equality. So it runs through at the very heart of our manifesto. We've taken this sort of like the central funding point that Fatima referred to. We've taken that midpoint. We've based our manifesto on the funds that we have, the Barnett formula, including the Barnett formula, which I don't know if many people know, actually pays out more. This is one of the benefits of being as part of the UK, pays out more per person than it does anywhere else in the UK. Now, going back, I stood in the election in 2015 as a first-time candidate for Westminster. And one of the facts that startled me, because it was a great learning curve about politics, was the fact that how much Scottish Government under Nicola Sturgeon had underspent the NHS budget. Now, that spending is a devolved matter. It is under the control of Holyrood. And frequently, year in, year out, we see the underfunding. The SNP have gone on a massive program of centralising things like health and social care, our police service, and it's been so damaging, absolutely damaging. And this sort of thing cannot be allowed to continue. We've got 14 years of consistent failures. We've got the highest drugs death in Europe. In Europe, what an absolute atrocious shame that is, to our shame. You know, and this is Nicola Sturgeon admitted on one of the TV debates, I took my eye off the ball. Well, what were you doing, Nicola Sturgeon? Yep, you were too busy fighting your internal civil war, trying to keep everyone together and tinkering with the independence constitution question once again. That is the greatest cover for the SNP for 14 years of failure. Every time the going gets tough, every time the figures come out, every time they're challenged, questions are asked. They come out with independence, it's Westminster's fault. They've got to stop using these excuses. They need to own up and fix the damage that they have caused. You know, this cannot continue. And that's why our manifesto, we've been very sensible with our costing. Absolutely. We've been sensible because we know recovery is going to take a long time. There's no way Scotland could have afforded all that furlough. No way. These things cost money. Nothing in life is free. Not even free tuition fees are free in Scotland, despite what the SNP tell us. Neither are free prescriptions. That money has to come from somewhere, you know. So we've had to be really sensible and say, right, okay, we know recovery is going to be really tough. It's going to be hard. But if we focus on recovering the economy and our people, we will get the country back to a better state where it will ever be in a better position to actually start creating that wealth itself that can start to pay for these things. But underpinning everything, even things like improving sort of perinatal care, there's a massive focus on communities like ours, which are always, you know, and certainly things like that, there's been a lot of research done into perinatal care and how it's disproportionately affected people from ethnic minorities. So that kind of equality, that kind of access, it underpins pretty much everything that we do. And it certainly is a big, strong theme underlying going through our manifesto.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And Ade, can we help you on this? How do you plan to fund this recovery you've promised from the toll?
Sorry, thanks, Jed. Just a couple of things, and then I'll address. Our manifesto is fully costed as well. We will embark on the biggest house building program. So we plan to build about 40,000 social affordable homes. Obviously, that would come with jobs itself, stimulate the economy. I think it's worth pointing out. A couple of points have been raised in terms of, you know, what's the case for the union. And when we started this meeting, I spoke about the fantastic UK vaccines deployment, the ability of the United Kingdom government to be a global player. We've had the furlough scheme where 80% of people's salaries were paid. The furlough scheme by the UK Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, is the best in the whole world. You know, that's just a statement of fact. And people may not want to admit to it. We've had the bounce back loans, you know, small business loans for small business owners. So yes, there is a lot of reasons to celebrate why we are in the United Kingdom. Now, having said that, you know, Nigeria is a country that I'm passionate about. I think we've got to be really careful in terms of bringing colonialism into it. And I didn't want to say this publicly. The reason why Nigeria could not get vaccines from the Global Alliance was because they did not have fridge to store the vaccines. That's not down to colonialism. That's down to inept government. And I don't think we should be making excuses for leaders in nations that are refusing to do the basic things, because people are suffering right now in Nigeria. So don't let us bring in, I'm happy to have a debate about colonialism and the effect it's had. Yes, it has had effect. But on issues like this, I think it's really serious. You know, it's not rocket science to buy fridge and to provide that to store vaccines. And so the failures of the Nigerian government should not be blamed on the British government, because I fundamentally believe in the ability of that country. Anyway, that's a side comment. in terms of going forward, we've said in terms of our manifesto, we would provide full fiber broadband rollout. It's a lottery right now in Scotland. I don't know how familiar people are with Scotland. So if you move to the north of Scotland, so the rural areas, basically, going to places like in Stirlingshire and in all those areas, it's a lottery in terms of connectivity, and with that comes a lot of fund in terms of businesses moving into those areas. So we want a full fiber broadband rollout to every single part of Scotland. We would also invest £2 billion extra into our NHS. And one thing Douglas Ross has been very clear about is that people coming out of the pandemic, a lot of people would have lost their jobs. And that's something we acknowledge. So we think people would retrain so that they can move into new careers. That's why Douglas Ross has announced £500 skills grants for people, for example, in colleges to take more modern apprenticeships to basically change their careers. And I think that's the level of intellectual conversation we should be having, because like I said in my opening statement, there is no point in all these, the things the SNP come up with. I know friends, I finished from the University of Glasgow for my undergrad, and 99.9% of my friends have left Scotland. That's the reality of what's facing us. There are no jobs up here. And so there's simply, where's the jobs, for people? You have people who have studied allied science courses, but there is no future for them in Scotland. And that's what the Scottish government should 100% be focused on, not speaking about referendum at the slightest opportunity. And that brings me back to my final point, and that's on recruitment as well. We want to recruit more teachers into our educational system. And that's where I'll end. Fatima said something about the educational system not being bad. We can look at statistics, right? But Scotland is in a global market. The United Kingdom is a global country. Our children will be competing with people from Japan, from South America, from the United States, from Australia. Nicola Sturgeon herself admitted that the attainment gap in Scotland is as wide as it's ever been. I didn't say that. That's Nicola Sturgeon admitting that herself. When she became First Minister, she said she was going to narrow the attainment gap. It's failed. It's actually widened. Now, the practical implications of that is that we are raising kids who are not going to be able to compete with children from other parts of the world. And that's something we've got to seriously look at.
Right. Thank you very much, everyone, on that. So what I'll be doing now is that I'll just be picking the questions across the whole issues just to make sure we're able to save time on this. So looking at your different manifestos, you've all promised to employ teachers, employ teachers. I mean, if I look at 5,500 additional teachers from the Scottish Green, I think it's 3,000 teachers for that's the Conservative, I believe, 3,000 teachers, and different promises about recruiting teachers. Now, and remember, this is all about you talking to the ethnic minority communities. From the ethnic minority communities, parents are looking at a future where their children will be able to see someone of their community standing in front of them as teachers. Now, how, in your own way, from your party, do you think you'll be able to help get more teachers from the ethnic minorities into our schools in Scotland? Now, before I start calling on you to answer, I'll tell you of some of the cases we've had, even of the few ones we have teaching at the moment. Somewhere in East Dunbartonshire, we have an ethnic minority teacher who has been treated wrongly even in school, and she stood up against it, and at the moment she's not the best of time in that school. So that's one. Two, we have a system where, well, we've had the University of Glasgow coming forward to apologize publicly on February 17 and 18 that yes, they've been discriminatory in their actions. So how will your party help in ensuring that ethnic minorities get, the opportunity for these teachers? Because we have a lot of young ones from this community now in tertiary institutions studying education, different fields. Apart from teaching, in all aspects of it, how do you intend to give more opportunities to the ethnic minority people? So I will start that this time around. I want us to go the other way around. So I'll start that with Ade.
Thanks, Jed. As people know, I actually work. I'm one of the ones who have been blessed to work as a lecturer here in Scotland. And I think I hope this is something we can all agree on. So I'll start with my role as a counsellor here in Glasgow. So a constituent of mine contacted me a couple of months ago that his child had suffered racism and wanted me to intervene. So I sent a message to the head teacher and said, what's going on? We've got to really deal with this. I don't think it's acceptable for children who are not even up to 10 years old, banging around racist comments. So that tells me something that we've got to deal with racism in Scotland. And if you have even a child that's not 10 years old already knows what to say, to be racist towards someone. So that shows that this is rife. This is not something banished to a section of society, and we've got to deal with this. And that means even in the teaching profession as well, you will have racism. In terms of our party, and like I say, I hope it's something we can all agree on. I think what we really should be doing is having mentoring schemes. People like myself, I've had people look at me like, oh wow, so you work as a lecturer here, and they're encouraged by it. I think supporting young people is very critical to that, and that's something I would actually give the Scottish government because they do something. I think it's with the John Smith Centre at University of Glasgow, and I think it's Kezia Dugdale that's sharing it in terms of funding for mentorship. And so that's something we should be looking at, mentoring people, helping people to grow and to be aspirational. But like I've said earlier, the lack of jobs here in Scotland is leading to a lot of brain drain. People need to see a future in the country itself. And I'll end here finally. So I, as a councillor, we're at a meeting in Glasgow City Council, and I said, look at Glasgow City Council, the largest employer in Glasgow. Perhaps, I think, given the fact that Glasgow is mainly public sector led, and look at the percentage of people from ethnic minorities that are employed by Glasgow City Council itself. And I questioned it. I said, we can do a whole lot better because Glasgow is the most diverse city in the whole of Scotland. So, local authorities have a role to play here as well. So it's about mentoring, it's about working with local authorities to make sure that they themselves reflect the society that they would like our children to live in. And the point about local authorities is important because local government controls schools. People may not understand how these things work. So the Scottish government, in terms of public schools, is actually run by local government. So people like myself as councillors, we make the decisions in terms of how local schools are run in Glasgow. So I'd like to see all that. So it's incumbent on every one of us on the panel tonight to mentor people in our communities. It's great to see different people here. It's also down to local authorities and the Scottish government showing leadership.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Adi. Aisha, can we have you on that same question, please?
I think with regards to certainly within education, being a teacher is not a particularly attractive prospect at the moment, given the sort of terms of employment that they're on. So many teachers are actually on temporary contracts, and I've got an anecdote somewhere. I was just having a little shuffle looking through my papers, but I couldn't find it. We've got an anecdote there about a teacher that's been on a temporary contract for 6 years. 6 years. And in that time, they can't get mortgages, they can't plan ahead. What do you do? So we need to make teaching a much more attractive prospect, especially to our communities. But bigger than that, I think, again, forgive me, but I think when we talk about racism and ethnic minorities, I think there is a lot of this conversation that is not tribal politically, and I think many of us would probably agree on this broader points, but structural racism exists. For me, Scotland is a beautiful country. It's progressive, it's liberal, it's tolerant, but sadly, I don't think we are as progressive as we think we are. We don't wear that progressiveness well. When push comes to shove, racism is a very nuanced topic. It's not born of one issue. There's no one silver bullet that can fix it. Even if we get more teachers from Bame communities, it's not going to stop racism in schools. It's structural. And despite what Tony Sewell has written in that terrible, terrible report, it is institutionalized. It's in every part of our society. And the people that have the influence, sadly, are not listening to people that have got the lived experiences. And I think for me, your question was about education. I would say that this applies to all aspects of society. We are, to some degree, and this is going to sound a bit cheesy, forgive me, the sort of like the early pioneers, if you want, for Scottish Parliament. We're putting ourselves out there. We're putting ourselves, and we are more susceptible to a lot more abuse online as people of colour standing for public office. And that's due, and I would say for the three of us, ladies, we probably get it even tighter than the gents do. So we have to keep charging forward. We've got to keep butting heads and making as much noise as possible, to make people listen. Some of that comes from education. Where do kids learn this? They learn a lot of this in the home. Where do mums and dads learn it from? It's a lot of racism is unconscious. It's in our DNA. And I would argue that even our communities are racist to each other. We've got to change it from the outset. Education. Let's teach our kids about empire, colonialism. It's a dirty part of our history, but it is a part of our history. It explains a lot about how, excuse me, my throat's going. It explains a lot about how we function. So we have to take this back further.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Aisha. If I can have Fatima come in now on that, please.
Thank you very much. And I absolutely agree with what Aisha just said there about how we confront racism. It's institutional, it's systemic, it permeates every aspect of our society. And we need to recognize that colonialism, the remnants still exist globally that affects how our countries in the global south develop and how our relationships also mix between developed countries and developing countries. I wrote a paper on colonialism, which is why I'm so familiar with the topic, but we absolutely need to understand that it's the reason why we are in certain situations today, that it can't be traced back to this dirty word, as Aisha mentioned. Colonialism is part of our history, and which is really sad. And I was in a debate just last week, the SNP Bame network. We had a Stephen Lawrence debate, and it was really sad to learn about the experiences that each one of us have been through in the past. Sometimes it's just growing up that you actually realize with hindsight that what you experienced was racism. Now, having said that, Scotland is a progressive country. I think that Scotland is one of the most tolerant countries in the world, but it doesn't mean that we're immune from racism or racist acts. It doesn't mean that we're immune from the systems and structures that still exist that uphold racist institutions. And that's the sad part. We need to be able to recognize it and confront it. With regards to the other question, recruitment from a Bame background, we released a Bame specific manifesto. I don't have it to hand, but speaking as a Bame person, I understand some of what needs to be done. And just from memory, I can understand what some of the things were in our manifesto. So for teachers, it speaks in broad terms, but I understand how I can relate it to teacher recruitment as well, like such things as how we strengthen rights, champion fairer employment, and improve representation. And that will ensure that we actually diversify what we have in our educational institutions. As Aisha just mentioned, in the first place, teachers, to be honest, we have a lot to be grateful for. Our teachers. It's not an easy job to do. It's not an attractive job to do. So that's one thing that we need to think of more broadly. But in terms of how we increase the Bame representation of teachers, we ensure inclusive curriculum, we need to start from strengthening rights, which means that in the SNP already, we have committed to bringing forward world-leading human rights legislation to reduce inequality and advance the rights of all marginalized communities. Hopefully from there, we can see people exercising these rights when it comes to more fairer employment. We need to champion fairer employment. We believe that there needs to be an open and honest conversation about race and institutional racism in the workplace, and that includes educational institutions, so that we can identify solutions that will lead to more equality and positive outcomes for minority ethnic workers. So I know, for instance, within the SNP, we have committed to expanding the specific duties that require a listed public authority to publish gender pay gap information for disability and ethnic reporting. So I would also like to see measures introduced that ensure that we uphold institutions to account in how diverse our workforce is, and they should be able to publish equalities data as well. So I would like to see more pressure on public bodies to publish that, so that we ensure more inclusive practices, because some would be put under pressure to be more inclusive. And there's one thing to also ensure that public institutions are more inclusive in their hiring practices. We need to make sure that these workplaces are also safe. That's why I did mention the issue of rights and fairer practices within the workplace. And also in terms of improving representation, we have already committed to increasing the number of ethnic minority people able to benefit from the new Minority Ethnic Leadership and Development Programme, which has been established in the John Smith Centre. So I would like to see something similar when it comes to teachers, in recruiting teachers as well, and in creating new leadership programmes in terms of teaching, because teaching is a form of leadership. So these are just some of the policies that we have outlined more broadly in the SNP, but some that I think we can make teacher specific when it comes to BAME inclusion and ethnic minorities. And if elected, one of the first things I'd like to see is more commitment from employers to producing this data on inclusion and workplace diversity and representation.
Okay, thank you very much on that. So Nadia, can we have you on that as well?
Yeah. Thank you very much. That's a very good question. So first of all, I need to say that everyone has the right to a good education, and the provision of education is one of the fundamental duty of the Scottish government, I believe. So teachers play a very crucial role in our communities and in the life of young people. I'm a mother myself. We can thank them enough with the hard work that they've been doing in the past few months. So yes, when it comes to diversity, is something that the Greens are really going to make sure that there is a good representation in schools, that there is enough teachers, and then we need to remember that representation is everything. Scotland is changing. There is a lot of ethnic minority people in Scotland in our schools. So I'm a mother myself. So it would have been nice to see my child seeing someone like a teacher that he can look up to. So it's only that we also need to protect our children in the schools. Why? Because there is a bullying happening. This racism is there. Even if we don't see it, it's not always reported, but it's there. And that can really affect the mental health of many children. They come home, they might not say anything, but is there any particular support in schools to make sure that those children are really looked after? Because if their mental health is affected, they are likely to really thrive and have a positive destination in the future. So we have a lot of work to do. And also we have to make sure, like the Scottish Green Party has have reversed the SQA grades, which really was unfairly for children. Get their chances be taken away just because of their postcode. And we know that those postcodes are where most children from the ethnic minority children are. What is their future if they are not protected as they should? So there is a lot of things to do there, as Aisha said. So I think it's important to have a good diversity in schools and make sure that the recruitment is appropriate, and then to make sure that everyone is represented, and then protecting our education system as much as we can, because this is the future. The children are our futures. And then teaching them history as well. I need to come back to that. We don't need to shy out about what happened in the past. They need to know their history in a positive way, so that teachers can also be supported and given the tools that they need, so that they can support the children to thrive in the future. So That's one of the things. Another thing also is to make sure that we have more teachers recruited, also to raise a pay income, so that they are getting less pressure, giving the children what they need, and having less issues on what they're getting as an income. So there is a lot of work to do, but that's one thing that the Scottish Green are very looking forward to support fully.
Okay, thank you very much. And Subiru, can you come in on this now?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to echo a lot of what my friends and political colleagues have said already. You know, we've got a long way to go on the journey of racism and discrimination, and it's only when we turn a blind eye and think we've won that things usually start to turn for the worst. And I think we're realizing that now. Scotland is not immune. It's not exceptional. It has the same structural problems as everywhere else, and it needs us to keep our eyes focused on that all the time and be cognizant of that. And that it's when we lose the awareness that it starts to creep back in, I think, in my opinion, including in the health service or the education sector. And I think having discussions like this, amplifying the issue regularly, is really important. And it's not a party political issue at all. I think we would all agree on that.
Yeah,
now, specifically about education, the Labour Party recognises the toll that the last few months has taken on children. And I think, particularly being from Bame communities, I think where we're all from, whether it's Pakistan or Nigeria or whatever, we take a pride in educating ourselves and educating our children. You know, it's something we do when our families came to this country. So I think it's important that all of us set out exactly what we are going to do for education. So the Labour Party has committed to increasing teacher numbers by over 3,000 in the next Parliament, and alongside that to increase support staff. So I hope there will be lots of opportunities for people from our communities to take those jobs. On top of that, every single child will have a personalised comeback plan and be offered personalised tutoring to catch up for all the missed schooling that has taken place over the last year. Now, as with health, education is solely the responsibility of the Scottish Parliament. We take our decisions in Scotland, and the government that's been in charge for the last 14 years, the SNP government, is responsible for that. So I think we need to take a moment and actually separate the rhetoric from the reality. And the SNP has been very good at putting forward Bame candidates in the election. There's no doubt about that. Fatima is an example of that. There's other people. But the problem is, how is that translating into the real world? You know, politics is a bubble, you know. How's it translating into the real world? Well, let's look at the statistics. You know, when the SNP came into power, 1.5% of all teachers in Scotland were from a Black or ethnic minority background. Do you know where the figure stands at today? It's 1.6%. No progress. And you'll be shocked, and this is actually a Lib Dem Freedom of Information request I'm quoting, so I'll give the Lib Dems here and credit them with that reference. The Lib Dems did a Freedom of Information request 2 years ago to find out how many head teachers in Scotland were of Black and minority ethnic background. 2. And this is after 13 years of SNP government. So yeah, it's nice to sit here and talk about diversity and plurality in the Parliament. I'm all for that. But that's not the place the people of Scotland live in. They live in the real world, in schools, in hospitals, on boards, in committees. And in all of those places, there has been no material improvement in the representation of Black and minority ethnic people in the last 14 years. And that is a shocking indictment of any government, particularly one that claims itself to be progressive.
Okay, thank you very much on that. So I'll just follow up on that with all of you on this now. And I will just be giving you just like 30 seconds to just give the answer on this one. So you've all come up with different aspects, your views on everything there. Guys, at the moment, when you fill out application forms, you tick which ethnic background you belong to, your sexual orientation. We have these companies also on all these organizations also on their website. You see them, they say, well, we're an equality friendly organization. And we've even seen in Police Scotland that they even go into different ethnic minority communities to do recruitment events with them and things like that. But is this not just ticking the box? how can we move this from ticking the box to actually seeing it playing out well in our society? What do you think you will do to help us? Because like I said earlier, if we use the Police Scotland, for example, real example, because I know they go into different communities to do these recruitment exercise things, but check them back 6 months down the line and ask, okay, from all these events you've done, how many people have applied from this ethnic minority community? How many have you been able to successfully recruit? Okay, those that were not recruited, what happened to them? So my question here is that how do you plan to make this more pragmatic than just ticking the box? I'll start this time with Aisha.
Are you muted, Aisha? You're muted.
Sorry. There had to be one person that did that at least once during this meeting. It has to be me. But I think that's an excellent question, and it kind of, I would kind of link back to my earlier answer about racism being so incredibly nuanced, and there's not one silver bullet. And one of the issues I've had, you know, and certainly even just looking at the Scottish Parliament, and you know, the kind of the lack of diversity, I would say, in terms of candidates, is the whole idea of it being a tick box exercise, and there's a real danger of that. Honest answer is I don't know how we avoid it. I genuinely don't. I think it's just a case of that we need to be seen. We need to make sure that what we see in society, what we see, whether it's Parliament or industry, it has to reflect what the country looks like. And as much as I hate tokenism, sometimes, and this really pains me to see this, I think sometimes if it can serve a greater good, then I can maybe, you know, swallow that once, maybe twice. But it's not something that obviously I like or support. Nobody wants to be that token brown person or black person or gay person or trans person. Nobody wants to be that individual. But equally, if it gets a conversation going, if it gets a dialogue going, if it starts to make people sit up and notice and say, hang on a minute, what are they talking about? I have no idea. Then in that kind of environment, I can't say I would accept it or I like it. I could tolerate that for a short period. But I genuinely, other than making sure that we have people that are visible in all these areas, whether it's, you know, teaching, medicine, industry, business, whatever, Parliament, as long we need to make sure that we are seeing much more diversity. And I would take it beyond race. I would take it to identity. You know, I would take it to some degree faith, although I think faith in the politics side is a bit of a tempestuous one. But you know, we need to be much more diverse in many ways. But tokenism is it's that kind of double-edged sword. You don't want it. We shouldn't even be talking about it in the 21st century. But sadly, I'll link back to my answer again about Scotland's not as progressive as we think we are. Is this a tool that we need to employ in the short term?
Okay, so in terms of that, let me just move it straight then to Fatima. In 30 seconds, how do we change this from just ticking box to pragmatism?
Yeah, no, absolutely, I agree. This is a Bame issue, and everyone's right to say the SNP has been in government for 14 years, but we do recognise that attitudinal change is really hard to come by. It's not an easy thing, and that's why I'm so glad that finally the SNP has listened to Bame communities and has been radical with policies this time around, which includes enforcing quotas in our selection process. Sometimes radical change policies need to be pushed through to ensure representation, because we need to start somewhere. We need to be able to force through policies that actually get to a point where we can see how normalised things are. Like I always say to everyone I speak to, based on what I studied, that we live in a post-modernist capitalist society that's based on the principles of a representative democracy. Now, some people will say, oh, we want to hire based on merit, but we don't. I don't think we'll ever live in a meritocracy when we've got so many different disadvantageous, discriminatory practices that we'll always be battling against. So what I always propose that we should always enforce representative democracy and principles, which includes that we ensure that we draw upon the widest pool of talent. And that might require quotas to ensure that we're representative. And enforcing quotas is not a form of tokenism when you're still drawing upon the best people of each group, because it's still very possible for you to say, yes, we want to work on merit, but you can still make it diverse as well. And that's very important, and that's where we're failing. Because the idea of meritocracy in the 21st century, believe it or not, or the idea that we want to think that we live in meritocracy, is that the best people are men, the best people are white men. That's how it's viewed. Look at the House of Lords, for crying out loud. It's all the same people. And so we need to understand that things like quotas do actually work to an extent, because we need them to ensure that there's representation. We can still get the best people through the quotas that we enforce for representation. And that's why I'm so glad that the SNP have been able to do that. And we're seeing good people put forward. Thank you.
Okay, that's Fatima. I'm just still going to come back to you because I know you mentioned the House of Lords there, and I'll come back to you on that question as to why the House of Lords is of importance to the SNP if you're looking for independence.
Yeah, come back to it.
Yeah, can I have no, not Nadia now. Can I have Adi on this, please?
Thanks, Olu. I don't know, Dr. Ahmed said exactly what I was going to say. You know what? We've had 14 years of SNP, and to be quite honest, I'm actually fed up. If people are actually going to believe what the SNP is saying right now, then I think yeah. The very first time, I've lived in Scotland now for about 13 years, and the very first time that I went to England, I think that was, well, I went down south in England to Birmingham, and I saw the huge gap in representation between so-called right-wing England. I saw a black person as the manager of a bank. I saw young black people in huge positions of authority. And then I came to Scotland, and it was a different story. Now, some people would argue that, it's due to the migration patterns. But you know what? Scotland does not need to go through what England went through. There is a country just by our side. We've seen how these things work. At the moment, we have an Indian, or someone from an Indian origin, Chancellor of the Exchequer. People don't give him credit. Before him, we had Sajid Javid from Pakistan, I beg your pardon, whose parents were from Pakistan origin, a Home Secretary from Ugandan Asian origin, Attorney General from an Indian origin, former Business Secretary Alok Sharma from an Indian origin, perhaps the most diverse UK cabinet in history, Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng from Ghana, his parents are from Ghana, Ghanaian British origin.
That's all brilliant bio, but how does this translate to us in Scotland?
Yes, that's the point. We've got to learn from people who have been successful, and how have they done it in England? And that's the point I'm getting at. They have focused on the education system. Now, a lot of political parties speak about social mobility, and I'm sorry I bang on education. I apologize. I'm a lecturer in further education, and I kind of know how these things work. You can predict the future of a child based on the quality of the education. Listen, where a child is going to end up starts from primary school. By the time they get to universities, government can implement policies. I'm going to tell you now, as an educator myself, it's already late. I want you to do a bit of research and check the most successful people in life. Look at their backgrounds. One thing you'd find that's very consistent is their early years education. And that's something we failed in Scotland. I'm just going to give an example because I know we're short on time. I'm trying to represent Glasgow and East Land, right? There is a secondary school in the ward that I'm trying to represent in the Scottish Parliament. Only 19% of pupils end up with a good grade. 81% with a mediocre grade. I'll just leave it there. In Scotland in the 21st century.
Okay, thank you for that. Nadia, can we have you on this?
Yeah, thank you very much. Once again, that's a very good question. So I just believe that representation is important in all institutions as much as possible. So in everything, whether it's police, school, government, everywhere, especially in government, because that's where decisions are made for everybody's life. So I would say that this is very difficult things to really talk about as if it's a simple things. Like it's a lot of work that need to be done to make sure that people are represented as much as possible. I would just have to say, we talk about racism and then things that happen to people. Yesterday, I was visiting a group of asylum seekers, talking about their issues, what's happening. And then there is a return of down raid, like when police officer, like 8 police officers come and break doors and then just threaten people, give them 5 minutes to get ready and then take them to the detention. I'm just wondering, as people in this country, is this really normal that in today's society that people are still treating like that, like dehumanizing them, humiliating them, like an older man have to fail because he just had a heart attack because of that? What kind of country are we trying to build here if we cannot look after the simple, basic human rights that is happening in our eyes? So it's difficult. These people don't always have a voice. They don't always have someone to talk about them. I'm wondering who gave those permission? What kind of decision is there for the police to go and then start treating people in such a manners? So I will just have to say that it's very frustrating. It's very scary. And then we also need to remember that those people, most of them are parents. They have children that go to school. Imagine if someone's go to school and then know that their parents have been through that, and them themselves as well. What kind of mental health are we protecting from those children and those people? So I just have to say, we have a lot of things to talk about. We can talk about everything, but that also is something that all government should be looking at, and then make sure that this is a progressive country, as many people has say here. But it's very shameful that we still treat people in such a manner. So, and the Scottish Green Party are doing their best so that we can make sure the immigration is under devolved power, so that we can end this kind of hostile policies that continue to affect people's lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much on that. Just on what you said there in the concluding part, that, a devolved policy. I've tried to see maybe we'll be able to avoid this part of it, but people are sending in more questions about it, and I'll just talk about it. So we know we have the SNP, the Greens Party for an independent Scotland. We have all the other unionist party. Different argument on both sides. But tell us, why should we not be independent? Why should we remain in the union? And I'll start this straightforward from Fatima.
Thank you. Just if you permit me to just address a formal point about BAME representation, I don't think it's right that we can praise any party for having good representation. Even the statistics that my colleague Adi cited, if you look at the BAME population in England alone, and even within London, where 40% of the BAME of London is BAME, I don't think we need to more than double what the Tories have in terms of representation. It's a small drop. They need to more than double that. So it's not even enough. That's not good representation. You've just highlighted a flaw with that small numbers. So sorry, because that's knowledge everywhere that's out there, and it's not good enough in all parties. So I think that's something we all need to address collectively. In terms of the question now on Scottish independence, well, the idea of Scottish independence is for us to be able to have a right to choose our own future. Now, we did have a referendum back in 2014, but we were promised a set of circumstances that have now changed. We have seen a change in material circumstances. We watched Ruth Davidson, Willie Rennie, and other pro-union leaders stand on top of Edinburgh, Carlton Hill, and ask us to vote to remain in the UK, or we lose things like our EU membership. But then we saw Scotland voted to remain in the UK, and we lost our EU membership. Scotland voted to remain and in the EU, but and even if my opponents say it was a UK-wide vote, the fact that nearly 70% of Scotland can vote to remain in the EU and still be taken out due to how unequal our union is, it just makes the case that when it comes to our future, Scotland's voice will always be a non-entity, and we never had that relationship with the EU. It was a table of equal voices. We watched a disastrous Brexit be pushed through during the pandemic, queues of seafood exporters at the borders because we have lost our once great trade relationship. And that's the result of us staying in the UK for an outcome that we did not vote for. That's why I'm saying that in this election, we're seeking the permission for the Scottish people in this election for an independence referendum to take place after the COVID crisis is over. And that will certainly be within the next parliamentary term, because we're not going to waste time continuing with the work of addressing the pandemic. If the COVID crisis has passed, the SNP's intention is for the first referendum to take place in the first half of the 5-year term. But that's once if the crisis is over. But in time to equip our parliament with the full powers, it needs to drive our long-term recovery from COVID and build a fairer nation. So we are clear that the referendum must be capable of bringing about independence, and therefore it must be accepted as legitimate and constitutional at home and abroad. So we will do this in a constitutional and democratic way. Now, the reason why I say with independence, it gives us the right to decide Scotland's future. It gives us the right to better our democracy, empowering Scotland's people to take the country in the direction we want to go. It gives us the choice to have governments we elect. We get to protect our free healthcare, our public NHS that's free from control of privatisation that the Tories are currently trying to push through in Westminster. And we get full control of Scotland's economy and resources. How can we afford it? Well, during the pandemic, the furlough money and all that didn't come from a magic money tree. Like every country globally, everyone borrowed, and Scotland would do the same thing. There's nothing wrong with that. That's what happens. Countries borrow. Yes, exactly. I can see Aisha shaking her head, but countries borrow.
Hold on. Okay, hold on, Fatima. You want to take us into debt? Is that what you're saying here?
No, it's not. It's the way the economy works. The way the economic model works. Every country borrows, including England, and that's how it works. The just figures that were reported are basically painted a picture of Scotland.
Hold on, Fatima. What about Switzerland? What about Norway? What about those countries?
They're independent countries with smaller resources. They're smaller they've got smaller natural resources, are smaller than Scotland in size, and yet they're doing fine themselves. And they have borrowed as well, like every other country, to get through this pandemic. And they're doing absolutely fine. So imagine what Scotland could do with the full powers of an independent country that can give us the full powers. Imagine what we can do with the natural resources we have already.
Okay, let's take this to Bayo. Ade, why should we remain in this union when we don't feel it's giving us equal opportunities?
I think this meeting is addressing issues affecting people from Bame backgrounds. And I'm going to say something controversial here. I know Fatima mentioned Brexit. Can I just say Brexit is the best thing that would happen to people from the Commonwealth, to people in the Bame community outside of Europe? And I'm going to give you practical examples. So when I did my undergrad at the University of Glasgow, if you applied for a job, there were categories, right? You had those who were Scottish and British were on top, and then second on the list were Europeans. Priti Patel has now scrapped that. So that means if you're an Indian doctor or Pakistani surgeon and you come to the UK, or your Nigerian doctor is from South Africa or from the United States, you get treated the same way as someone from France or Germany. That to me is a fantastic thing in terms of Brexit affecting people from the Commonwealth. And that's something that people in our communities will be able to relate to. So the idea that Brexit is actually a bad thing, Brexit will open up the United Kingdom to the rest of the world. The European Parliament this week has approved the Brexit deal. So it's not the disaster that the SNP is claiming it will be. We have a deal with the European Union. What Britain is basically saying, why should we be Why should we limit ourselves to only deal with Europe? Why can't we sign a trade deal with the United States, a trade deal with South Africa? And I'm going to give you a practical example. Kenya, right, which is a developing country, serious leadership. They've been trying for years to strike a deal with the European Union. The European Union said no. Now, the European Union is supposed to be a progressive entity, but they've blocked, emerging economies like Kenya from striking deals with themselves. The UK, Theresa May went to Kenya, I think it was in 2017, and people on the left of politics, people in the SNP, mocked Theresa May for going to Kenya for a trade deal. Now, that's the United Kingdom Prime Minister, fifth largest economy in the world, going to an African nation and saying, you know what, we want to strike a trade deal with you. And I think people should be happy about that. There is nothing for people in the Commonwealth to be ashamed of in terms of Brexit. It will literally open up Britain to the rest of the world. In terms of the union itself,
hold on. And let's just cut in on that, because I know you said, yes, Kenya has not been able to, we're finding it difficult to have a deal with the EU. But I know that the EU has a trade deal with the Eastern regional countries. And Kenya and one other country decided not to sign up to that. So I'm just trying to bring the facts out here that, I don't think it's the way you've portrayed it there that Kenya did not sign that, maybe it was the EU that was the issue there. But I think it was Kenya itself not wanting to sign that up. Do you have anything to say on that?
Right. So it's a good point you've mentioned. So there is a difference between economic alliances and then dealing with individual countries, right? Each country, every single country has the right to not be part of an alliance for several reasons. I don't know why Kenya made that decision. The problem with the EU is the EU as an entity does not want to deal with individual countries. And you can't just accept that. You can't pick and choose how you want to, kind of trade with people. Even the United States of America, deals with countries. If you're a serious country, you can't trade with the United States of America. That's why we have, framework in place like the World Health Organization, which makes sure that there is a global rule in terms of trading amongst different countries. So yes, I do take your point in terms of the Eastern Bloc, but we can't have a situation where Kenya really has been trying to strike a trade deal with the EU, and the EU, it's I don't want to go into the complexities of it. It's down to other countries saying, oh, we can't give Kenya this sort of favorable deal because it would impact on our own local market. So there is a level of protectionism even within the European Union, and advocates of the EU, this is something they don't acknowledge. The EU itself is actually a protectionist bloc. If you think about Canada as a single country, that's another example. Olu, Canada has been trying to strike trade deal with the EU for years. That's one of the reasons why people said the UK can't strike a trade deal with the EU, basically because of the Canada example. Because the EU just does not want, to deal with individual countries. They think they're going to there's a level of protectionism, going on there. Another country is Australia, I can go on and on in terms of how the EU themselves are protectionist.
With all of this, tell us why we should remain in this union.
Absolutely. And that goes to all the points I've been mentioning. In terms of borrowing, that was the point that was made. I think Fatima may not have known this, but she's actually made a case for the union. The reason why the UK Chancellor has been able to borrow to fund the pandemic at the levels that he's been able to do so is because of low interest rates. People need to understand how global economy works, right? The UK has one of the lowest borrowing interest rates in the whole of the world, which means we don't have to pay quite a lot of interest on what we borrow. And because the UK Chancellor has been fantastic in terms of managing our economy, so we've been actually able to borrow to fund the pandemic. And independent Scotland will not be able to have that level of interest rates to borrow from. That's a statement of fact. In fact, as a matter of fact, Royal Bank of Scotland, I'm not sure if people are aware of the news, have said today, right? Today, that if Scotland does become
the headquarters to London.
Absolutely. If Scotland does become an independent country, they will move. They would not even think about it. They would move their headquarters down south to London, because London is the financial capital of the whole world. So it's not as rosy as people from the SNP like to paint it. But that's one case. The other thing is our ability in the rest of the world to drive change. So look at things like even climate change. I know the Green Party has, speak about themselves defending climate, but the UK government has been able to bring COP26 to Glasgow. It's coming to Glasgow. I'm a local councillor in Glasgow, and I'm looking forward to COP26 in Glasgow. That's because of the huge stature that United Kingdom has on the global stage. On independence themselves, the Scottish people, the current polling shows that 54% of people now back staying in the United Kingdom as opposed to going on. Scotland has its own identity. We don't need to separate from the union. Scotland is not a colonial, country, as some people, claim. It actually offends me, because I know what colonialism means. To bring down, to sort of water down the word itself. Scotland does not have that kind of relationship with the United Kingdom. Scotland has its own culture, its own heritage, its own football team, its own identity on the global stage. Yeah. And so it's a false equivalence.
Why do you think on all those points you've mentioned just now, Scotland has its own culture, its own resources, its own football team, its own netball team, its own all of this? Why do you think Scotland cannot be self-reliant and independent?
I think you're phrasing the question in a wrong way, and it's very tempting. The right way to frame the question is Scotland is much more better in the union. Now, the acts of the union was signed.
That's the way you want to frame it.
No, that's not the way I'm framing it. The acts of the union was signed in 1706. Between the Kingdom of Scotland and the Kingdom of England in 1706, over 300 years ago. And the relationship, and actually the history of both Scotland and England is intertwined. You can't really speak about British history, thinking about the huge accomplishments on the global stage without speaking about Scotland, and vice versa as well. So it's a practical example. You think about the TV was developed by a Scottish person, antibiotics was Scottish person in British institutions. Alexander Fleming, I'm not sure he was in Oxford, where he discovered antibiotics. It's a global alliance. You think about the vaccine itself, it's the UK government working together as a union of nations. That's
what I would do. That's fine. I think you've made a point there. Now, I'll be going to Aisha now, but before Aisha comments, one thing I want to add, because this is part of the question I've seen from most of the people listening to us about your party. So, with the question I've asked already, why should we not be independent, or why should we remain in the union? Some people, about 10 people, have stated the same line of question, that why did the Lib Dems, the most pro-EU party in the UK, why have they dropped their policy of rejoining the EU? So as you address why we should be independent or not, please try to address this as well.
Sure, happy to. And I know that's something that's been flagged up a lot. Right, okay, that was a lot to take in there. Right, so I've kind of got to go back to what Fatima was saying there when she was talking about her case for independence. A lot of, with the greatest respect, Fatima, all I heard there was if, but, maybe. Nothing's changed since 2014. I'm all for a conversation. I am happy to have my mind changed. I like to think that, in this world of politics, you can't keep your mind fixated and stuck in one lane. As part of being a politician, you need to be open to having your mind changed, and I'm open to it. I've not heard anything new at all since 2014. You mentioned one of the benefits of being independent would be that Scotland's got a government that it didn't elect. In Westminster, we've got a Tory government. You're right, but then that's same in Scotland. Scotland has a SNP government that we did not elect. The majority of people did not vote for the SNP. So, if we're going to throw mud at Westminster, you've got to be prepared for that to get flung back. Forget of, the whole SNP messaging is very emotive. It's very Braveheart and look at us. And it seems to be the go-to answer that when anyone challenges the SNP on independence, it's just they turn it around and say, Well, why can't we? Do you think we're too small? Do you think we're too poor? Do you think we're too stupid? No, nobody's saying that. And it's really disingenuous and very, very false, I think, for the SNP to throw it back. I would like hard evidence. I would like facts. You know, you're talking about how countries borrow. Yeah. So what would our central bank be? You know, what currency would we use? The currency question has been constant since 2014. We have yet to hear an answer. You've got various people in your party. Somebody's saying this, somebody's saying that. As I recall, I think it was one of your existing MSPs, which is quite terrifying that she should come out with a statement, had said in regards to the currency question that things would be okay because she'd have a credit card to use in Mexico. And I think she was also the lady that talked about borders between North and South being good. And then Nicola Sturgeon then went on the next day, this emergency PR repair operation because of all the stuff this MSP had said. You know, you guys don't know what you're talking about. You've got an internal civil war, which Nicola Sturgeon is trying to manage. It's exactly the same type of civil war, Addy, I'm coming to you next, that caused Brexit. I appreciate Brexit might be deemed as something that's positive for people in Commonwealth countries, and I can understand why. But what makes this country attractive would be my question to you. What makes it so attractive for people from the EU and the Commonwealth to come to? I am sadly old enough to remember when the UK was called the poor man of Europe. I recall that. I am that old, since here died. You know, we are strong, we are attractive to other countries in the Commonwealth, especially because of the strength that we have, the strength of our economy, the strength we have on a world platform. And that has largely our influence and our wealth. A lot of our wealth has come from being a member of the EU. You know, and the thing is, I do, and I'm not, again, I am old enough to remember when all this was happening, you know, and things were changing. You know, you talk about Brexit being a good thing. Brexit might be a good thing for a small few people, and I totally accept that. Just as independence might benefit the odd person here, but we're not talking about the odd person or the odd group. We're looking at the whole of the country, what benefits this country in total. The UK Union is not perfect by any means at all, but we cannot challenge it, Fatima. How can you honestly sit there and challenge it when you're not using the powers, the full powers that devolution has given you? The argument would make a lot more sense if, you know, all those powers were being used, all the money was being spent and not rerouted to the independence campaign, you know, and given to the people that money is routed for. Okay. If you weren't using the Barnett formula to fund the independence campaign, the argument would make a lot more sense if you said, we've used the money, it's still not good enough. Right, let's build a case for India. I would be more than happy to sit down and listen to that case, you know, and it's the same argument with Brexit. The tactics for independence are exactly the same, divisive, really, really dangerous arguments that the Vote Leave campaign used for Brexit. Brexit has been a disaster for the UK, Addy. There's no way. A union of 50 years, and look at where we are. We've not even touched the surface. I talk to people every day in my business circle that are closing up. They cannot afford to stay trading because of Brexit. So, you know, to see that it's, you know, going to help some people, I get that and I respect that. I genuinely do. The European Union was not a perfect institution either. But what you don't do, and I would say this for Brexit and independence, if you break your finger, you don't chop your hand off. You try and make it better. It's not right. It's not perfect. No union ever is. No marriage is. You know, but you have to work at it. And when it's broken, you fix it. And you fix it when you've got a seat at the table. And we've lost that. We've lost a major point of influence globally in a lot of issues because of Brexit. You know, we heard for Brexit about it was an oven-ready deal. You know, you've talked a lot about how difficult trade deals are everywhere with Canada, etc., Addy. But, you know, I remember, and I'm old enough to remember when Boris Johnson went out on his tour with the oven-ready deals. I remember when Dominic Raab was talking about how he hadn't read the Good Friday Agreement, but everything was going to be fine. Northern Ireland would not be impacted. And again, I'll go back to my age. I am not a million years old, by the way, just in case anybody wonders. But I do remember the troubles. I remember hearing on the news constantly about the IRA, the bombings in Manchester, in London, in Birmingham. I do remember those days. I remember my days at university of having the most bizarre, insane conversation, and Brexit has allowed that to come out. And I'm really cross with the SNP for politicizing Brexit, because one of the core issues of independence that you're challenging is that re-entry to the EU. We would not get re-entry into the EU because Scotland never had entry into the EU. The UK was a member of the EU. So if Scotland was to go on, it would have to apply as a brand new member. So we do not even meet the criteria for the EU.
So Aisha, if I may ask that, just at that point where you there, is this the reason why your party then dropped that off your policy?
There's no party I'm quite happy to stand by this. There is no party in the UK that has fought as hard as the Liberal Democrats to stay in the EU. There is no party at all. We fought, and the twists and turns, coming up for 2019, etc. The twists and turns that happened in Westminster, we fought our level best. The majority of the country, Fatima is absolutely right in that, the appetite wasn't there. The appetite wasn't there to leave the EU, but there is a reality. There is a reality, and no one can deny that we have gone past the point of no return. The point of no return, no return, no return. We did absolutely everything we could to stop that or delay it in any which way. It wasn't possible. Brexit has happened. That is the reality. Because it has happened, it does not mean we have to like it, but it's there. We cannot reverse it. We're past that point completely now of reversing anything, cancelling anything. The Conservatives have made sure of that. And to some degree, so have the SNP, because they've used that as a political football to further Indy. We have an acceptance of the reality. I would love nothing more, neither would my party, to go back, be a member of the EU. And it is something we are absolutely committed to doing and exploring, rejoining the EU at a time, when it's sensible to do so. Right now, in the middle of a pandemic, COVID, to look at issues like that is neither sensible or appropriate, and it's not what people want. It is not off the table. I am more than happy to make that absolutely clear. But we are where we are. We are with Brexit.
Okay, Aisha, where we are now. So, Sibyl, let's come to yourself, Sibyl. Why should we not be an independent country?
Because what's on the table is not independence. The SNP are not against unions. They want to transact our 330-odd-year-old union, for one that's 50 years old, and one in which we would enter as Scotland on a much inferior terms than we had once been in as the United Kingdom. It's not independence, it's dependence, because we would depend on them to set our interest rates. We would depend on them to tell us which of our industries we could sponsor and not sponsor, and recover and not recover based on state aid rules. We would depend on them to know who and when can come into our country. So this is not independence. It's dependence. It's not freedom. It's enslavement. And they're not against unions. And like Aisha said, no union is perfect. The United Kingdom is not perfect. The European Union was not perfect. You have to work at these. But look at what and it's not a case of independence. It's a case of breaking up the United Kingdom. We would, as an island, lose our place in the Security Council. We would possibly be much more diluted in our influence in NATO. We possibly might lose our place on the G7. So the whole of this island would be materially poorer, and Scotland would not be richer. It's not independence. And she talks about being equals in the European Union. Well, these are the mathematics. A country similar size to ours, and the ones that the SNP espouse as a bellwether for the success of small countries in the European Union, is Ireland. Look at the mathematics of the Parliament that decides what the European Union does and doesn't do. Ireland has 13 MEPs. Germany has 96. France has 79. Italy has 76. When we were in the European Union, and I regret not being there as much as anyone else, we had 73. So we're going to go from a country that was at the top table with France, Germany, and Italy to one that's going to be sitting at the table with people like Ireland, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic, accepting the terms of the bigger countries. It's not a partnership of equals. It's not rule making. It's rule taking. You know.
So we'll take it this way. So now Brexit has happened. We are still faced with that question: Scotland independence or not? So from Scottish Labour, what is the argument to stay in the union?
The argument is as I've described, because we are stronger together when we pool our resources, and COVID-19 is a perfect example of that. You know, we pooled our resources, and listen, I have no sympathy for the Tory government. They could have gone much faster, much harder, much stronger. But the fact is, the capital and the resource and the loan rates at which we can borrow are much more favourable as a country of 70 million as they would be from a country of 6 million. And we've seen in very recent history, you know, when you vote for something like separatism, you don't vote for it over an election cycle. It's over a lifetime. It's over a generation. And political philosophies come and go. But once you've separated, that's it. And we've seen in recent history, you know, in Ireland, how they faced almost bankruptcy at the time of the financial crisis. Whereas in the UK, we were able to weather the storm and actually stabilise the country. Alistair Darling in his book writes, we were an hour away from the cash machines stopping. And just, can you imagine that? You know, and Alistair Darling at the time as a Labour Chancellor was able to use the machinery of the whole of the United Kingdom to stave off that financial Armageddon. Can you imagine if we'd been split on these islands, how it might have ended up? You know, it's about pooling resources. It's about having confidence as a nation that we can be in a wider union but still remain our individual characteristics. And that is what the United Kingdom gives us.
Okay. Now, Nadia, let's hear from you. Why should we be independent?
Yeah. I'll make it very simple. So at the end of the day, this is going to be a choice of the Scottish people. They are the one that's going to decide what they want to see. And people say, not all marriage are worth saving, so nobody asks for a divorce if they are happy. So I would just have to say, if Scotland want to be independent, that will be up to the Scottish people. However, the Scottish Green believes that the independence in Europe would allow us to build a fair and green Scotland. And independence is now our only route back to the EU membership. As an independent nation, Scotland will have the power and the potential to be a leader in the transition to a zero carbon economy. So working with the EU, the United Nations, and our partner across the world to lead the change. Therefore, the Scottish Green will campaign and then vote for a referendum with the next parliamentary term. So once again, nothing can be done, and we cannot achieve that while we are still in the union. So I would just make it simple. There is a lot of things to say. I also mentioned about the immigration issues. So none of that will change if we are still in the union. So we are definitely supporting we are going to campaign for the independence.
Okay, so Nadia, I'll just say something to you because I know I was listening to Patrick Harvey 2 weeks ago, I think, and he said, yes, he wants an independent Scotland. However, he's going to tax those creative ones, those entrepreneurs, those who have used their ideas to create wealth. That is going to tax them more. But how do you think that will encourage those who are doing this to even do more? Don't you think if you get that independent Scotland, all of these people who can create wealth will just move down south?
I don't think that will be a problem. It's important when they make more, they can contribute to pay more tax so that we can support other issues that are more important. There are a lot of issues. We need to fund those areas that need more support. They make a lot of money, they make a lot of profit from their businesses. So I really don't see where is the problem to tax a little bit on people. Yeah.
Okay, so just like what was posed to him. Yes, they make a lot of money, they make a lot of profit, but yet they employ people, they create employment, they pay they pay their wages and salaries, they contribute into the pension of those people. And do you still expect them to go on and still do that when you're in an independent Scotland, taxing them almost 40 or 45% of what they make?
While there's still inequality of where there's wealth inequality, yes, absolutely. You're talking about wages. There is a 0-hour contract on people working with a minimum wages. All of that, they keep having more profit, and then people are suffering more and making life difficult for their employment. So what is the problem to tax them what is important, so that the people can get paid the fair amount of wages, so that we can fix inequality? Because without that, I don't see how this can be manageable. So
okay. Thank
totally
you.
like that.
So I'm just going to ask this last question, because I know we've even gone past the time we planned to finish this. And I think people are enjoying it, still putting in so many messages. So the question here is about, is about our structure, our architectural structures out there. If you get on the train now from Central Station and you're saying you're traveling towards East Kilbride, turning back towards Edinburgh, and then going back down south, you find that some of the monuments we have that actually tells the story of our history, they are in so much, uncelebratable condition. They are so, I'm passionate about art. If some of you don't know, I'm passionate about art. And we see all these monuments as the beauty it has to the tourism, the attraction to our nation. What are your parties going to do about this? What agenda do you have about maintaining and refurbishing Scotland schools and architectural monuments? Plus, a good example straight away is the bridges between Central Station and East Kilbride. The state of those bridges now, you can't even think of it. I can't remember what colors they are. So I'll just say, in 10 seconds each, please, what is your plan? And I will start this time. We'll go back to Subril. Yeah.
So that's a very good point, Lulu. I think a lot of that neglect is down to a lack of power in communities. The SNP government is very good at wanting power from Westminster, but it's very bad at distributing power to communities. In Glasgow, we've had our budget cut by £390 million over the last 10 years, and we've had no more powers to sort out any of these issues. Glasgow has a rich heritage of buildings, of architecture, and I think if there was more power in the local council, better financing, then we could get the job done. But at the moment, we're not even in a position under this SNP administration to reopen our libraries. Maryhill Library, one of the most beautiful buildings you'll see in Glasgow, which served the constituents for over 100 years, is now going to be shut down, and that library's space is going to be halved and then sent to a little reading room across the road. We need power distributed from Holyrood into our communities.
Okay.
Freedom and independence doesn't stop at the Scottish border.
From there, I'm just going to move straight away to Nadia. What will you do about the state of our infrastructure?
Yes, thank you very much. That's a good question. And first of all, it's important to secure the funds that need to be provided, and then allocate the funds where it needs. So it's all a matter of priority as well. We need to see where the priorities are, and then we can fund and then make sure that all the infrastructures are looked after as they should, because with everything we are going through our recovery, so everything will be down to what is a priority, and then that can be fixed. So I believe that's.
Thank you. So to Fatima, before you answer it, I'm just going to add on to Fatima there. So we pay our road tax, we pay our council tax, we pay all the taxes, the pay tax and everything. Your party is in government. Your party has been in government for the past 14 years. In your time in office, we've seen all this situation with all this infrastructure. Why should we? What should be the expectation? Will you be seriously prioritizing this if voted for?
No, absolutely. And as I understand, just to correct me on what Zubair said, because of the direct blame on the SNP, first of all, as I understand, when funds are allocated for projects, they do go to the local council authorities whose job is to implement it. So that's my own understanding of how local authorities work. They're delegated to them. So how the local authorities disperse their actions through the local councillors, that's a decision for them, first of all, as far as I'm aware. So I'm willing to be corrected, but from my own understanding from actually viewing it, I understand they're the ones who make all the planning permissions. So that's number one. In terms of infrastructure investment, there's still a long way to go. Everything needs to be constantly re-updated, re-evaluated, and it's getting the funds we have. But I do know that in our manifesto, we have promised to create a national infrastructure company to manage and develop public assets for public good, because it's a matter of understanding that we need to centralize it. But as I said earlier, things are constantly needed to be updated and re-evaluated. And despite us not being in a great state, there's always room for improvement. But I certainly feel that that in terms of putting the blame on any particular party, it depends on the funds that we have, which we delegate to their local councils to actually make the decisions on what they want to prioritize within their local communities.
Okay, Aisha.
Yeah, I think when you've had the power for 14 years, it's kind of amusing to hear somebody say, don't blame the government. The government is responsible for funding local authorities. And I know Fatima said, as far as she knew, the funding for local authorities, Scotland-wise, has been cut year on year on year on year. The pressure on local authorities, unfortunately, has increased. So the more money that's cut, the more they've got to do. They cannot allocate the funds accordingly. This all comes down to accountability. We've got 14 years of a failed government who every election come out and say judges on our record. They can't even publish the OECD report until after the election, which is the education report, which we all know is going to show the massive failings by the SNP government. That's just in education. Every year they come out, the same electoral promises, the same failed pledges and promises that they come out every year. They're rolling them out again this year. They have a magic money tree. The money that is allocated to Scotland through things like the Barnett formula is not being dispersed properly. It's not being dispersed in completion. There is money that is not put out every year on year. It gives them something to bang about. If you will not fund your local authorities, those services cannot be provided. So we see, I don't know the bridge that you referenced to, sorry, although I'm not aware of it, but I can quite imagine it, because that's the kind of scenes we see all across the UK. The Liberal Democrats will invest heavily in infrastructure. That is one of the bases of recovery from pandemic. We're talking about high-speed internet connections and reliable mobile signals across the whole of Scotland. SNP have centralised everything towards central Scotland, but they seem to forget there is a northern half of the country which constantly gets left behind. And we've talked.
Aisha, I assume that what you're telling us there is that the Liberal Democrat will look at Scotland holistically on.
We believe in giving the power to local authorities, to communities, because they know their areas best. They know how to spend that money, whether it's renovating buildings or cleaning up statues or putting it into other parts of infrastructure. That's our core belief.
So let's move to Ade. Ade, I know you are a councillor, and I know you've been there. You can give us a perspective from Glasgow City Council. What will be your priority? What will be the priority of the Tory party in terms of our infrastructure in Scotland?
Thanks, Olu. I could probably say a whole lot about these. So I wrote the Conservative budget for Glasgow City Council in 2019, and it was basically a budget of cuts. Now, a little bit of background to this. Funding from the UK government to the Scottish government has increased year on year, but the Scottish government have basically been cutting funds that goes to local authority. So in Glasgow City Council, we've had to cut millions of pounds. One of the libraries that Dr. Ahmed mentioned, Whitinch Library, my ward, I've been involved in campaigning against the closure of the library myself. And that's what happens when we have a a lot of centralization, power going to the Scottish government, but not being devolved down to local authorities. That's solely a fault of the Scottish government. What we, the Scottish Conservatives, have proposed in our manifesto is to ring fence, funding for local authorities. So we will enshrine in a parliamentary act in the Scottish Parliament. A set amount of money must go to local authorities. We can't have a situation where we keep slashing funds for local services. There is a lot of derelict buildings in Glasgow. If you go up and down Glasgow, go to the east end of Glasgow, even in some areas in the west end as well. Whitinge Borough Hall in my ward has been lying there, no use to it. And so many people would have seen old buildings in Glasgow. We can put those lands to use. It's all about empowering local communities. As I say, we've got this fantastic plan to fund local authorities more, but also we've got to work with local authorities so that they can deliver, have the right infrastructure to be able to dispense these funds. So I'll give a practical example. During the pandemic, when we had so much funding from Westminster government, Glasgow City Council struggled to give businesses funds. And that's down to the Scottish government not having engaged in local capacity building exercises with local authorities and basically abandoning local authorities, not empowering them. We need a Scottish government that's going to be focused on priorities, that's going to build capacity in communities, not just coming out with fantastic pledges. We need a Scottish government that's going to fund local councils properly. And I think once we do that, we can begin to address some of the appalling states of our infrastructure. And finally, as well, it's also about delivery, an intelligent strategic delivery. So it's not about spending so much money on, for example, the major roads and then the inroads are in a bad state. It's got to be consistent.
Thank you very much. So, like I said earlier, we could continue on this discussion for so long, but I want to say a big thank you to all of you for your time, for your, for giving up your time to attend this. It's an history and our people have listened to you. And hopefully what we wish is that you all, 5 of you get in there into Holyrood, because we know when you're there, you are representing our community, and we will be asking questions of you, even going further after that. So thank you so much, Dr. Ahmed. Thank you, Ade. Thank you, Aisha. Thank you, Fatima. Thank you, Nadia. And also from the whole community, I want to say thank you so much for joining us today on Diaspora Radio International, which is on this program, The Nigerian Pride. We wish you all the best of results next week as we all move towards it now. I know you're in your final stages of the hustling and canvassing, and wishing you more speed, especially for those of you who are fasting, and wishing you the best of results at the end of it all. Thank you very much. My name is Lion Olusokunbi, and that is it today, the Bame Scottish Parliamentary Election Debate. We've had it now. You've all heard from them. Make your choice. Make your decision. We'll see you on polling day. Thank you. Bye for now.